Hua Cheng stood. You're right. So this fetus spirit must not derive from a normal miscarriage. A masked man entered just then with his head bowed down. He presented a clay pot with both hands and handed it to Hua Cheng. Shi Lian checked to see if the man's wrists were still carried a cursed shackle. But this time, the man's sleeves were tied down fully and completely. Hua Cheng took the pot with one hand and glanced at it, then turned to pass it to Shi Lian where he sat on the black jade divan. Before Shi Lian even reached for it, the muffled cries of a child could be heard from within. It seemed something was madly knocking about inside the clay pot, making it shake and rattle from side to side. Shi Lian became even more cautious. When he took the clay pot, he peeled up a small corner of the seal and peeked in. A dreadful chill rushed up his spine. Inside the pot lay something that resembled a fetus. Although the arms and legs were grown, they were weak and powerless, and the head remained obscured in shadows. All in all, it was no more than a malformed lump of organs. This was its true form. Shi Lian immediately resealed the pot and said, I see. He had once heard of individuals who searched for pregnant women who had not yet come to term. These people cruelly cut open the woman's womb to transfer the unborn child into little ghosts to cast spells on their behalf. The ghosts could be incited to do harm, ordered to protect the caster or a dwelling, or kept for general luck. This fetus spirit was no doubt the product of such sinister magic. Its mother was almost certainly one of Shi Lian's worshippers, or his protection charm wouldn't have been tucked inside the clothes of that unborn child. Shi Lian hummed, then said, This fetus spirit was captured by Sunlung, but would you mind if I take it with me to investigate? I encountered it before at Mount Yuzhen, so this is the second time it appeared before me. I don't know if it's mere coincidence or if there's a connection. If you want to take it, then take it, Hua Cheng said. Even if I didn't make an appearance, you would have captured it. Shi Lian chuckled. Be that as it may, Sunlung caught it effortlessly, much more so than if I were to try. It was only an offhand comment, but Hua Cheng remarked, Is that right? And if I hadn't come, how did you plan to capture it? Take it into your stomach, then swallow your sword. He had actually hit the nail right on the head. There was no trace of displeasure on Hua Cheng's face, but Shi Lian somehow sensed that Hua Cheng might be a little peeved. Instinct told him that if he didn't answer truthfully, Hua Cheng would become angrier. Just as Shi Lian was thinking of a response, he suddenly felt his stomach shrink slightly, and without thinking, he said, I'm a little hungry. It was only after the words left his lips that Shi Lian realized he'd said anything at all. Embarrassed by the reaction on Hua Cheng's face, Shi Lian explained himself honestly. This time it's true. A moment later, Hua Cheng finally snorted and laughed out loud. Once he laughed, it was as if all of Shi Lian's clouded gloom dispersed, and he sighed in relief. Hua Cheng, in comparison, was half laughing, half sighing, as he nodded. All right. Hua Cheng wanted to host Shi Lian and set out a feast at Paradise Manor, but when Shi Lian heard feast, he knew it'd be far too much of an event. He suggested instead that they go out for a stroll and find something to eat at the same time. Hua Cheng agreed. It was quite warm within Paradise Manor, and while they had entered dripping wet, they were both dry soon after. But it would be awfully conspicuous for Shi Lian to stroll around in women's attire, so he borrowed a set of clean white robes from Hua Cheng. Afterward, they set out. Even after walking for quite a distance, the fetus spirit's wailing was still audible, its cries of Mom tearing through the air with dogged tenacity. However, Ghost City was resonant with a wicked racket of its own, so the din drowned out its cries. The main street of Ghost City was as extraordinarily bustling as always, and on either side of the street, stalls sold specialty snacks. Although the ghosts running the stalls were the same as last time, their attitude towards Shi Lian was completely different. As Hua Cheng walked next to him, shoulder to shoulder, the bizarre-looking stall owners came out to greet them with smiles, bowing almost halfway over and fighting one another to offer welcome. It reminded Shi Lian of a certain idiom, the fox assuming the power of the tiger. Even as the citizens paid their respects to Hua Cheng, hundreds and thousands of eyes fixated on Shi Lian, their burning gazes full of judgment and conjecture. Just who was he to be able to walk side by side with the Lord of Ghost City? This made Shi Lian wonder if maybe he had made another mistake. Hua Cheng seemed quite at home here, standing before the eyes of millions as a sturdy rock in the flowing pandemonium of the current. He asked Shi Lian, What do you want to eat? Shi Lian wanted to end things quickly. Finally seeing a stall that was selling something not too awfully weird, he said, Let's go with this one. However, Hua Cheng said, Not this one. Why? Shi Lian was curious. Hua Cheng didn't say a word, but gestured for him to look inside. Shi Lian took a look, and when the stall owner saw them stop, he rubbed his hands excitedly, as if waiting to welcome them. He vigorously wiped down the tables, chairs, and benches, but the tool he used to clean the furniture was his tongue. The bowls and cutlery dripped with shimmering beads of water after having been licked by that long, wide tongue, and they reflected a shine that made them look brand new. Shi Lian decided to abandon the stall and hurried away. After a few steps, he spied another stall, a shop selling chicken soup. It appeared neatly put together, and the sign on the door said, "Home-raised chicken, slow-cooked broth. Made fresh, guaranteed clean." Shilian stopped. "Oh, chicken soup. How about a bowl?" Hua Cheng, however, said again, "Not this one either." Shilian got it. Is the problem with the dishware or the chicken? Hua Cheng brought him into the shop, peeled aside a set of curtains, and gestured for Shilian to look. Curious, Shilian poked his head in and was immediately rendered speechless. An enormous pot sat inside the kitchen, with a roaring fire beneath it, steam rolling forth. Inside the pot was a large man with a bright red cockscomb on his head, and he was happily taking a simmering bath in the boiling water. Next to the pot were many buckets. They contained salt, pepper, herbs, and other such seasonings. From the storefront, a customer yelled, "Boss, add more salt to the soup, it's too plain." As the man bathed, he grabbed a large handful of seasoning and smeared it on himself, rubbing it hard into his body with a towel to increase the flavor. Then he let out a long, warbling cock-a-doodle-doo. Shilian dropped the curtain and silently walked out. After making a great round of the stalls, they finally found a shop. Its branded specialty was authentic delicacies of the mortal realm, though Shilian remained doubtful of just how authentic the cuisine could be. For example, as far as he knew, mortal chefs wouldn't use the flesh of large, hard-to-hunt yao beasts to make barbecue skewers. Nonetheless, this shop was the most normal compared to its brethren. The moment Shilian and Huacheng sat down, the mob of ghosts who had been following them immediately crowded around, eagerly soliciting the opportunity to offer more dishes to their meal. That hog butcher carried a pale and nicely meaty human leg, and he slapped it soundly as he cried with his rough voice, "Chenju, do you want fresh thighs? This just came in." The crowd yelled at him, "Get out of here! Do you think Chenju's friend would eat that shit? You're taking him for the green ghost. Maybe your own thigh would be more edible. It fucking reeks of blood. You're disgusting." The hog actually raised one of his pig legs and shouted, "If it suits the palate of Chenju and Chenju's friend, my old leg is nothing. I'll butcher it. Let me tell you, meat off my old flesh is definitely bursting with flavor." Shilian grinned in spite of himself and ate his kongi with his head down. Huacheng pointedly ignored them, so the crowd of ghosts instead fervently tried to push their goods onto Shilian. "Local street food specialty, brain juice, specially pickled yao brains, aged with over 50 years of cultivation. Smell this delicious fragrance, my good sir. This duck blood pudding is really good, quack. Take a look, quack. It's freshly cut from me own flesh, quack. Won't you give it a try, quack? Authentic, fresh graveyard fruit. If it ain't growing on dead bodies, we won't pick it. It's true, not a word of falsehood." Mountains and mountains of food were offered, so much that Shilian had trouble seeing it all, and he thanked them endlessly. He didn't want to snub this wave of ardent affection, but at the same time, so many of those exotic street foods were truly difficult to accept. In the midst of the chaos, he saw Huacheng sitting there, his hand propping up his cheek, watching him with a broad grin. Shilian looked around, cleared his throat, and pleaded in a small voice, "Sanang." Only then did Huacheng speak. "There's no need to mind them, Gaga. They're overly excited because there's a guest." "Chenju, don't say that!" a ghost immediately pleaded. "It ain't like we get excited over just anyone. If Chenju is our granddaddy, then Chenju's Gaga is our great uncle." We have an illustration. "Yeah, of course we gotta get excited when great uncle comes around." Shilian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What the heck were they even saying? "Stop that nonsense," Huacheng barked. "Shut up." The crowd of ghosts hurriedly acquiesced. "Yes, sir! Chenju is absolutely correct. We're shutting up. He's not our great uncle." The few female ghosts who had been giggling on the side clearly couldn't hold it in anymore, and unexpectedly they called out to Shilian, "Hey, you! Weren't you that Taoist Gaga who told Lanchang you couldn't get it up?" Shilian almost spat out his mouthful of kongi on the spot. It was as if the crowd had uncovered a major secret, and they exploded. "Holy shit, you're right! It's him, it's him, it's him! Lanchang was going around telling everyone!" The smarter ghosts hastily smothered the mouths of those who were chattering, but Huacheng had no doubt heard. Shilian peeked up and saw Huacheng cock an eyebrow and watch him with an unreadable expression, as if trying to make sense of what "get it up" had to do with Shilian. That was the original excuse Shilian had used when the female ghost clung to him. Even though the crowd had mocked him at the time, he faced it like it was nothing. Yet now that claim had been thrust in front of Huacheng. Shilian suddenly couldn't endure it. He was so embarrassed that he desperately wished he could choke himself to death with his kongi. Shilian began. Huacheng seemed to be waiting patiently for him to continue. But how could something like this possibly be explained? Was he really going to argue with a straight face that he was not, in fact, impotent? Shilian finished pathetically, "I'm full." That wasn't a lie. He really was full, so he stood up immediately and hurried out of the stall. The ghosts howled ceaselessly after him as they carried their mountains of delicacies and exotic dishes. Goodness, my lord! You're not going to eat any more? Hua Chung ran after him too, but spared a moment to look back. He once again commanded them, "Beat it!" Yet again, the crowd of ghosts hastily beat it. Shi Lian had taken off in a random direction, but seeing that the ghosts hadn't followed him, he slowed his pace to wait for Hua Chung. It wasn't long before Hua Chung came strolling up with his hands clasped behind him. "I didn't know. Guga suffers from such an unspeakable affliction," he asked deadpan. Shi Lian immediately cried, "I don't!" Then he lamented woefully, "Sanlang!" Hua Chung nodded. "Very well. Sanlang understands. I won't speak another word on the subject." He put on the face of an extremely good and obedient individual, but he was very obviously faking it. "You're so insincere," Shi Lian said. Hua Chung laughed. "I promise, you will not find another person more sincere than me in this world." At that familiar response, Shi Lian laughed too. A moment later, he asked in all seriousness, "Sanlang, do you know where Thousand Lights Temple is?" That is chapter 44.